When we worked with Ramp in their very early days, they launched a bill pay product. Tech news is something that reporters generally are not interested in covering. But at the time, Bill.com, I think, was one of the best performing stocks and doing really well. The angle that we took, we went to CNBC, which really only cares about public market companies, and basically pitched it as like this, hot fintech startup is taking on Bill.com with their new offering that also happens to be free, whereas Bill.com is paid. And they CNBC loved that angle. They ended up covering it. They did a great story on it. And then the next day, I think Bill.com stock was down a little bit. And so one of the news aggregator sites compared the two, Ramp launched this and now Bill's stock is down. So that's a creative example of being scrappy.
I don't know if it's Elon effect or every founder sort of wants to be direct and tries to be a persona on Twitter. Is that where the PR industry is going?
So it is, the general sentiment is yes, you should be doing this. I just personally, maybe this is a contrarian view, I just don't know that it's going to be possible for every founder to build up a huge social following where it's actually worth the time investment in the first place, because we're not all just going to be following 1,000 founders on X and paying attention to every LinkedIn post that they do. And so I don't know if it's always realistic.
My guest today is Emily Gerber. She's the founder and principal of SixEastern, a PR firm for startups and tech companies. She was previously a corporate communications at Uber, did product communications at Box, and was an account executive at Blank & Otis. In this conversation, we'll talk about effective PR strategies for early-stage startups, what is the evolving landscape of media relations in tech industry, and tips for securing impactful media coverage. If this is the first time listening to a startup project, don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you listen to the podcast. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I think a lot of my audience is, tech heavy. People who work in tech who are trying to start companies, founders, operators, and they're usually unaware of the PR industry. I think a good place to start for us is if you can set a context about what actually, a PR company or a person does in general, and then we can sort of narrow down it to tech in specific.
Yeah. So I think the biggest misconception I see when chatting with founders, especially first-time founders that haven't necessarily done PR before, is kind of conflating marketing and public relations. So marketing involves a lot of, paid methods. You could do, paid advertising, sponsorships, that sort of thing. There's also the owned content, stuff that you post on your blog, doing webinars, the social channels that you post to. So PR is really neither of those things. There's obviously always going to be a little bit of overlap, but PR is anything that's earned media. So earned is when you are able to, get that speaking slot or get that interview with a reporter, or get on a podcast without necessarily needing to sponsor or pay. You're getting it because of your credibility. And so the value in that is that because you're not paying, there's supposed to be this sort of objectivity to it, where you earned the spot because of your credibility or the business you're building or what you have to share with the reporter. And so it's kind of held in a different regard than other kinds of marketing. And it's an important part of the puzzle. But the thing is, for startups, because they're usually small and new, there's not going to be the same sort of interest necessarily in the business as the companies that are further along. And so I think the other big misconception is that, you launched your company, now let's go get that big TechCrunch feature or that big Wall Street Journal feature. And most of those publications have maybe one or two relevant reporters to your business, and they're in charge of covering your entire space. So that's not always necessarily what you can get right off the bat. And there's other things that we can go into that you can get, but I think that's usually what I find from the first conversation.
At what point in a startup stage is it worth, having an internal or an external PR engagement?
Yeah, great question. I would say for a lot of seed stage companies, it does not make sense to have a PR agency on retainer. There are exceptions to that rule. We're working with a seed stage company right now that is doing some really wild stuff. They have an AI tool being used for a class at Harvard Business Review, and every student's taking that course. And to me, that's a big enough story where it doesn't matter that how much funding they have. Reporters are going to be interested regardless. But if you're building like a more infrastructure AI tool or software, chances are, unless there's something that's really, really unique and the bar for unique is super high, you don't need to have an agency on retainer yet. What you can do is you can potentially still make like a one-off announcement announcing that the business exists and that you've raised funding, especially if you have, a relatively large seed round or some great investors. You just have to kind of be more realistic with what you're going to get for that piece. And so generally speaking, when we work with a company that's early, we're trying a lot of different things. We're being really creative with the outlets we go after, and we will get something. But you just can't, you shouldn't bring on a PR agency if you're expecting, a really top tier piece of coverage in the Wall Street Journal, because that's not realistic. But yeah, in a project capacity, seed stage companies can do something, but I wouldn't have someone on retainer. I think by the time you're Series A, there's more that can be done, and it can make sense. I think there's some really great consultants out there too. You don't necessarily need to bring on a full-fledged agency. We're kind of sit in the middle where we act a little bit more like consultants, but we are an agency. But by then, you're still not going to be getting the huge stories, but there's going to be, podcasts to go on. That's how we originally connected, was through some of our clients that went on your show. There's going to be awards and lists you can submit to. Like just yesterday, Forbes AI 50 came out. We had 2 or 3 clients on that list. There's going to be speaking opportunities at conferences. We have a bunch of clients going to the MIT AI conference next week. And so there's going to be stuff that you can be doing and find value out of the engagement. But really, the longer you wait, I think the more you can end up doing, and you're going to get higher ROI from the engagement. So even then, some companies wait till they're like closer to Series B, I would say.
I think the seed stage phenomenon is probably unique to AI startups, and there's a recent phenomena, right? Because I think Mira Murati was raising a 2 billion seed round, which would probably be an IPO 5 years back.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and I think that's definitely true. We work with some companies that are technically seed stage, but have raised amounts that are closer to what you'd hear for Series A or Series B. And so the whole stage, I think terminology doesn't work in the same way it used to. It's almost better to talk in dollars and cents, because at least then you're talking about something more tangible than just stage.
In terms of like just the landscape of PR for startups, who are like the top tier firms that the OpenAIs and Anthropics are working with?
Oh, interesting. No, I think they're very hush-hush about who they work with. But yeah, so I think there's a couple of buckets of firms out there. There's the large incumbent firms that have been around a really long time, like the Edelmans of the world, and even I think Outcast Agency is one that's a little more modern but has been around a while. And so there are many companies that work with them. I think the ones that find the most value out of it are big global brands that have large in-house comms teams and need a lot in terms of like not just media relations, but stuff like tracking and reporting and sentiment and trust barometers, which I think is like an Edelman term. And so I think there's definitely still a place for those firms, but when earlier kind of companies that are hoping to move faster engage, like they're not going to, well, first of all, it's probably out of their budget in the first place, but it's just not the right kind of model for what they're looking for. And I think they'll be the first to admit that. And then there's like more mid-sized firms like Strange Brew Strategies. I think Mission North is one of them. Ones that have like 50 plus employees, and I think a lot of tech brands will work with them, and they still do a lot of media relations too, which is a big thing we're starting to see as companies move away from just doing media relations, or firms moving away from media relations and trying to sell like larger packages of like content and other services because of how hard PR is getting. So like I'm always on the lookout for firms that'll still do just PR. I think those are ones that will. Definitely Strange Brew. And then we're like a little bit smaller than that. And I think we work with our fair share of top AI companies as well. And I think where our real sweet spot is for those companies that are hoping to like move really, really quickly, just focus on media. I think we act like a startup. We do very little in the way of like huge plans and tracking and reporting. And we love to just get out there and pitch. And like, with most new clients, we're pitching our first week, and that's not a fit for everyone, but for a lot of startups, I think they find that very appealing. So yeah, that's something in our DNA that I'm hoping to preserve even as we grow.
I think one of the metrics, I mean, externally I see is, when you hire a PR firm is, you talked about, getting into TechCrunch, getting into, high profile events as a speaker. And you can name those. And when you see those, you know that something is working, right? Um, how do you sort of cater the expectations? Because every startup will see, your previous success story and then come to you that, hey, I also want, when I raise my Series A TechCrunch coverage or a Wall Street coverage. Like, how do you gauge or like set those expectations with the company that hires you?
Yeah. So I try to really dig into the details with them of their story versus what they're, comparing themselves to. And maybe they are the same caliber, and maybe we can go pitch something that's similar to something else we landed for another client. Even when we are able to do that, it often just comes down to reporter bandwidth. So I explain that. Sometimes you could have the coolest story in the world, but if it's happening at the wrong time, or you just have bad luck with pitching it, part of it's luck, then you might not get the same win. So the first thing I try to do is emphasize how much of it is not in our control. And another thing to emphasize is that reporters are not, we're not paying them. They're not getting, their only job is to report on the news and to tell stories they think that their audience will find interesting. And so they don't owe us anything. They don't owe the startups that they cover anything. So I try to emphasize that as well. And then if they're comparing themselves to like kind of a unicorn story that's not similar to what we're telling for them, I try to like go into the details. Well, this company shared that they just reached 100 million in ARR, or this company has celebrity investors. Like, what are we bringing to the table that's similar? So if there's an outlier, I try to compare. And then another thing that I find that founders love to do is find the one exception, like the one time, I was talking about this for Lenny's podcast. He had one CEO on that didn't fit his normal criteria for what he's looking for. And then every client sending me, see, he did do a CEO interview that looked like this. And so exceptions happen, and I try to explain that as well. But it's definitely, I think, it's a balance, because you also don't want to be shooting these, you're a founder of a company, you're super excited about what you're building, and oftentimes it is really cool or really novel. So it's a balance of showing them that we're equally excited and that we're going to try to get them the best possible outcome, and that they're in the best possible hands to get that outcome. But it's a tough world out there with media. That's such a good question. I love that. So first, I think something we do really well that maybe needs to be like recognized more broadly is the way you'd pitch a podcast should be so different from how you pitch a traditional journalist, for many reasons. Most podcast hosts have a very specific niche that they want to focus on, and we learn that more the more we work with a certain host. So, I'm getting better insight into the kind of guests that you like to have on, and that happens with a lot of different hosts. But it's not about just what's the biggest name we can get them. A lot of times, like, they are looking to, it's a conversation. So the name helps a little, but it's not the whole thing. And so I think with podcast pitching, we try to be very direct and conversational, to the point, and focus on not just the person's credentials, but what they can talk about on the show. And really pattern match that to the specific opportunity. Like, if we're doing our jobs really right, we're actually looking at several past episodes, seeing trends, and then figuring out guests from there. In a perfect world, we do that really deeply every single time, which isn't possible, but you can do some level of pattern matching even just by looking at titles or the little abstract that's below. And then this is like more of a hack, and I think founders can do this as well. I love just DMing on LinkedIn as well. I think that's how we first got connected and still are connected, but it's so nice because you can just send these short little pitches, ask if you're open to guests. If they say yes, come up with your best ideas for them, and then go from there. And it's just more conversational and casual, and everyone's on like LinkedIn. And so I really like doing that. And that's something, if a founder decides they want to be on a handful of podcasts, you can spend an hour, do some research, figure out what those are, send them a note. Here's why I'm relevant, and here's what I can talk about. And chances are one will reply. So that's podcast. Media is very different. I think if you're trying to pitch Wall Street Journal, they are going to care about traction and the business and things that like show that they're not able to do their own due diligence on why you're important. You need to kind of give them that information. And then relevance, either to a specific story that you know they're working on, which sometimes we can get word of based on stuff they post on social or something else, or like why, like the why. Pitching them on news? Are we pitching them on an intro conversation? And if you are pitching them on an intro, like why should they take the time for this intro? Like, is it going to be relevant to something they're covering in the future? So it's a little more precise, and I think the things that you lean into tend to be different. But I guess the thing that's similar is we love the like direct to the point, not salesy tone, because it's just, I think the reporters are really allergic to like, we're the most innovative platform, revolutionizing the XYZ. And like, I'm sure you are as well, but like, no one wants to hear that. And I'm sure you get pitches as well where you're like, this is not something I would be interested in.
I think there is also, we see all this advice about, the pitch has to be simple, it has to be direct, it shouldn't be salesy, but all you see is salesy pitches. And you can pretty much see the format everyone is following, that they'll take the latest episode, publish on your feed, and it's included in your top paragraph with the same blurb of your guest. And, it feels very automated, and
Yeah.
you can almost see like, okay, they've automated this into, you put a LinkedIn profile here and my guest profile, and there is some matching, and it's creating an auto blurb with AI, and they're hitting send. And sometimes they often mistake the name of the podcast, or name of the guest that they've recently listened on the podcast. So you can clearly see that it's all automated, and they've not done the research on what the podcast actually wants. And
Yeah,
even though
I
it's
think
like
there's some
sounds very
podcasts.
simple.
I think that, I haven't used any and I'm not interested in using any. I think there are some software tools that are popping up that will like guarantee to get you podcast guests locked in, or for your spokespeople. And that's exactly what they do is they create a template message and then they plug in the rest. And it's funny because I even think the general template message before adding in all the weird like custom intro, that part's even bad. So it's like you at least need to draft like a good, at least if you have a good foundation message, then maybe the other part can be forgiven a little bit. But I think I hate those tools because it just makes our notes get buried, and I'd rather have one really good podcast to pitch and send it to 10 relevant folks rather than blasting like 100 with some like weird semi-custom thing. But like, and it's a fine line because you can make actual custom intros that like you can still say like, I love this episode, but one topic that didn't get included in it that my guest could talk about is XYZ, or like, I disagree with this take that you recently had about XYZ. And that's like an authentic intro because it showed at least a layer deeper of like understanding. But yeah, I hate that all these automated ones are kind of getting in the way of that.
And over the last 6 to 12 months, what I realized is there's a huge gap in like um, the open AIs of the world. And then there are so many companies which are at Series A to Series C stage, which have no coverage, which are really good companies. There's no storytelling really happening. I see that that's a really, really big market, and everyone wants to be on the same 5 podcasts or same 5 newsletters. And there's a huge competition. While there's this middle, which is really, really, really big in tech, and probably your approach to PR is actually, capturing those companies, and, how do you do a better storytelling for them. For podcast specifically, do you advise founders to sort of, craft the message? Like, do you help crafting their message? Because I feel like things can look really great on paper, but having done a lot of conversations, not every great founder is a great storyteller.
Yeah, totally. It's a fine line with this as well because I actually think a lot of the larger agencies spend so much effort crafting messages that like the execution piece gets lost and they're not even focused on pitching. And I think it's easy for founders to get too in their head if they're like going off of talking points. I think those can actually be more valuable for traditional media interviews where you really do want to land the headline and we really do want to land like one or two specific quotes in. For podcasts, I don't know. I'm a fan of going at it a little more casual. Like if we can get the questions in advance, which some podcasts do share, some don't, that can be useful for like, hey, look these over, see if there's any that you think are alarming or you want to discuss with us or you're not sure how you'd answer, and let's go and focus on those. But because it's not really a product pitch most of the time, it's like talking about their journey and their story. I prefer they usually don't spend too much time on specific talking points because they usually just end up sounding really canned or out of place. One thing that can be really great though for prepping for podcasts is having like a couple of stories or anecdotes in your back pocket that you always just use and have there. And those can be useful to think of in advance. Otherwise, they might not occur to you on the spot. So I love that. I love having like, here's a story that I love telling or a couple, and then just pulling those out when they're.
Yeah, the advice I give all my founders before we start recording, usually we have a call a couple of weeks before, and I always tell them to start a document to note down their thoughts or like the highlights that they want to make. And it's sort of like the strategy a lot of, thought leaders have. Like you have ready to go points repeatedly refined again and again. So and I shared them with the doc, and they're always, I tell them you can use this as a starting doc for future interviews, and you post your viral ideas here. Because people often see, successful thought leaders and they think it's coming off of the hip on a podcast. It's not. They have this running notes of ideas, and sometimes editors and a team of people, bringing interesting statistics, and combining that weekly into a narrative that they believe in and reinforce in, right? So that's a strategy that's happening for a lot of thought leaders. And I try to give that playbook out to a lot of technical founders who are not doing it, even though they have good ideas.
Yeah.
It might come out as tweets, but they're not actually being captured in conversations, even though they might feel like, oh, I forgot to mention this idea, or I didn't bring up this idea. But it has to be a little bit more conscious than, just, going like, okay, let's go shoot the shit, right?
Yeah. That's why I like the stories as well. And a good point you raised too that I forgot is having in your back pocket like the stats that you can share, or like whether it's like the customer names that you're able to disclose and maybe some of their stories, like the latest stats on the business that you're comfortable sharing, any market or industry stuff, like those are not going to be top of mind for you unless you have them prepped in advance. And if you're at a startup, you do want to make sure you're being consistent with what you're sharing each time and you're not just riffing with the company metrics. And so, yeah, that's another area where I think it can be really useful to have something written down in advance.
I think there's also this whole trend of like founders going direct and not engaging. I think if you go 5 years back, like when Uber was the hottest company, like there's a whole PR filter between companies and what the founders of the companies communicated. But now I think, I don't know if it's Elon effect or every founder sort of wants to be direct and tries to be a persona on Twitter. Like, is that where the PR industry is going? Like, are your founders thinking about doing that? Is that the advisable strategy that you tell your founders, or how do you look at that trend?
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up. We're actually currently doing a survey of startup founders and folks on their team that run marketing. And one of the questions, I think we have about 60 respondents so far. So 60 different startups have replied from Series A through actually, I think C through Series C for the most part. Some larger companies as well. And I think 96% put that it's important to build up your founders' social profiles, which is actually just like even way higher than I expected. And so the general sentiment is yes, you should be doing this. I just personally, maybe this is a contrarian view, but I just don't think it's realistic or scalable for that to be the case. Not every founder, first of all, not every founder, it's going to be something that comes naturally to them. And some it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time, especially if they're not willing to just outsource their, social presence to someone else, which wouldn't be going direct in the first place. And then I just don't know that it's going to be possible for every founder to build up a huge social following where it's actually worth the time investment in the first place, because we're not all just going to be following 1,000 founders on X and paying attention to every LinkedIn post that they do. And so I don't know if it's always realistic. Granted, this was a tech specific, startup specific survey. And I think within our community right now, it's definitely the thing that's the hot sort of new comms approach. I think there's tons of value in it, especially for the right founder. Like we work, like Perplexity, like Aravind is so good at like posting authentically on social. And it's just a certain person, and there's like a lot of founders that are like that. But it's a certain personality type where I think it seems to come more naturally. And then for others, I just think it would be distracting them from the business and other sort of marketing that they can do. And the thing about comms, like the work that we're doing, instead of the like newer sort of going direct approach, is like if a client goes on your podcast, there's like a built-in audience, and so you're kind of like able to tell the same story but without having to do the work of building the audience. And granted, when you build the audience, like that always gives you sort of the reassurance that the people are there to hear whatever you have to say. But I think it's a lot more realistic to be going on other people's platforms and getting attention that way.
Yeah, I think everyone is, in my view, trying to be a little bit like Elon. Um, and Elon's strategies generally only work for Elon. And like whether his type of, building companies or approaching like, communication, I've seen like anyone who emulates Elon doesn't work, but it only works for Elon. If you like follow Elon and replicate what he does, he can do it, but it doesn't really work for other ones. It's almost like strategy in the first place has to be, playing on your strengths. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
find a medium that works for you and then double down on it versus, if it is working for someone else, it might not necessarily work for you, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You got to lean into who you are, because if you try to fake it, it's not going to work.
Yeah, because like so many people have successfully leveraged LinkedIn, but maybe your voice doesn't work for LinkedIn. Maybe it
Yeah.
works for Twitter, or maybe it doesn't work for both. Maybe you should just go on podcasts and just talk about
Hmm.
your product. Like it could be, in a different so you have to find your medium
I
essentially,
think that's a
right?
great, yeah, I think that's great advice. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the interesting, examples where, you work with founders, and if you can give like concrete examples of how you help those startups, and I think it crystallizes this idea of, how PR can help certain companies.
Yeah, yeah. Let me try to think of some interesting ones that are relevant. I'm gonna give a really old example to start, because I feel like this is very it gives good advice for other sort of founders.
Mm.
So when we worked with Ramp in their very early days, they launched a bill pay product, and this is before, I mean, they were starting to become a hot company, but they were still early in their journey. I think it was after their first big funding round. So they launched a bill pay product, which is like not like B2B software. It's like B2B software, startups paying their bills. Like it's not the most sort of sexy topic in the world. And product news is something that reporters generally are not interested in covering. It's just not relevant to their audience, and product announcements are among the hardest things to pitch. But at the time, Bill.com, I think, was one of the best performing stocks and doing really well. They're a public company. So the angle that we took, we went to CNBC, which really only cares about public market companies. That's really their focus and who their audience cares about, or what their audience cares about. Went to CNBC and basically pitched it as like this, hot fintech startup is taking on Bill.com with their new offering that also happens to be free, whereas Bill.com is paid. And they CNBC loved that angle. They ended up covering it. They did a great story on it, and it's again a niche feature within a software company that we got them to cover. And then the next day, I think Bill.com stock was down a little bit, and so one of the news aggregator sites like compared the two, like, oh, Ramp launched this, and now Bill's stock is down. So that's like a creative example of being scrappy. It's not going to work every time, but if you have like a strong, and it helped that they were like on the upward trajectory at the time. But that's like an example of, yeah, like paying attention to what your the publication that you're pitching, or the reporter that you're pitching, like what they care about. In this case, it was the public markets, and then finding an angle based on that. So yeah, that's one example. Or like, I mean, this is kind of similar, but with Perplexity's first funding round, they got a Wall Street Journal piece that was from the Google beat reporter, or the Alphabet beat reporter. And he really, like, his past like 20 stories had only been about Alphabet. But again, it was like enough of a comparison where you could talk about the startup that's taking on this company that he focuses on so deeply, and did a great piece. So yeah, that's I think one strategy that can work well.
It's also about timing, right? You have to be aware of like what's happening, and only at maybe that particular week it might work, and then it will not work. So you have to be a little bit
Yeah,
of taking advantage
that's
of
a
the
good
time.
point. Yeah, so usually when we work with a company on any announcement, especially like a launch or funding announcement, I like beg them to give us flexibility on timing, because like one of the biggest secret weapons you have is like going back to the reporter and saying, I know you can't cover this right now, but if you can cover this at any time, we'll hold the news for you. And a lot of companies, I don't know why, they set sort of arbitrary, like, we need to get this out on this date. And I think it's just like the self-imposed sense of urgency, which can be great, but it's totally not worth risking like a Wall Street Journal or even a TechCrunch piece just to get it out by X arbitrary date. Rarely there's like an actual forcing function, but it usually really doesn't matter. Like if you know a competitor's launching and you want to get out before them, that's a legit reason. But if it's we want to have it out before X conference, like that conference matters way less than getting a top tier feature. So that's like a huge thing. And like in at least half of the pitches I send, I say, if you can take this on, just let us know when.
So in all our conversation, we talked about TechCrunch, Wall Street Journal, maybe Harvard Business Review. People say traditional media is dead, but these are all traditional media names, right? CNBC, Wall Street Journal, TechCrunch. Why does it matter for startups to be on the traditional media when traditional media is overall like going down?
Yeah, it definitely is smaller. I think but one of the biggest benefits is like the trust that you get from being in a traditional outlet. I think, there's just certain brand cachet that comes along with having your startup in a publication that people know and respect. So I think it helps with trust that goes with customers, with potential candidates. I think it's just sort of a validation piece that companies still look after, but it is a lot smaller. But I should flag also that like there's traditional medias like the outlets or like the publications that we've talked about, but then there's also this whole world beyond podcasts too of like new media. So like Alex Conrad, who is the Forbes tech reporter, just launched Upstarts, which is his new media brand. Eric Newcomer has Newcomer, which is his new media brand. And like some of those are more open to startup stories and startup conversations. And Alex just did a great interview where he had talked about how he wants to like root and champion for startups, and like he's still going to be a fair journalist. He's not going to just do glowing, puff pieces on companies. But he's like also sees a place within the market where there can be sort of a champion for startups. Maybe champion's not the right word, but so I think those are kind of blurring the lines between like some of the really new stuff like podcasts and then traditional. And so I really value those as well. And like I think when I see one of those pop up, I think about how is this relevant for my clients and what should startups be doing here. So there's like this third bucket that I think is very helpful right now too.
So what are the best ways to pitch to this alternate set of media?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be very similar to pitching to traditional media. If I were a founder and I was reaching out, like I think similarly, I would go on X or on LinkedIn, and then if they don't reply, go to email and just send them like a really authentic note about like what you're building and why they would care about it, and like actually take the time to understand why they would care about it and ask if they are, open to an introduction or figure out like if they have a conference coming up where you might be there. But yeah, the more thoughtful you can make it, I think the better. But yeah, I mean, these are folks that come from traditional publications, so it's like not too different from how you would pitch them in the past.
Are there like examples when a company does something and we think that it is organic, but it actually is not organic? For example, I can think of I mean, this is not a true startup example, but when Mark Anderson wrote the Software Eats Everything, there was a well-defined strategy because one of the co-founders at A16Z was, into PR and marketing, and they explicitly wanted to write something really influential as an opening for the firm, and they spent really months to get that Software Eats Everything blog that is now very famous, right? So a lot of people might think that it happened organically, but there was a specific step-by-step process, and they knew that we need to write something influential and then attach it with Mark's name, and that sort of will compound its effect. So that was a particular strategy. But as a PR insider, are there any such examples which are we as ordinary observers might think, oh, okay, this is organic, but it was sort of thought out step-by-step strategy?
I think a lot of things, if not most things, fall into that bucket, especially if it's coming from a slightly larger brand or company. If it's an early startup, then maybe there was one conversation around it and then it went out into the world. But I think there's a lot more happening behind the scenes, and PR is involved in a lot more than most folks realize. And PR is often the one drafting quotes when a quote is included from an investor. we're often taking the first stab at op-eds and penning those behind the scenes. So I think that would be the case for a lot of things that are out there.
To close my thought around traditional versus the new media, I think the traditional media still holds trust in the algorithms. I think the gods at Google actually trust the traditional media links and words coming from traditional media more than. I think the monetary value is less, but the trust value is very high, and that's why I
Yeah.
think it works, at least in my perspective.
So another thing we're getting asked about a lot that's relevant to that point is like SEO for new AI search engines, like for ChatGPT and for Perplexity. Like I think I saw like Perplexity CEO in a Reddit Q&A said there's no way, like I don't even know if SEO is going to be a thing with AI search. Like there's no way to sort of like game it or do it at the current moment in time. And so yeah, we've had clients say, what publication should we be in if we want to make sure that we're always a result when someone's asking an AI search engine about us? And I really don't think at this point in time it can change your strategy. I think you should go after all the same publications you have been, focus on the credible news outlets, focus on the places where your customers are. It's going to be really challenging, I think, to game the system in the same way that you can with Google, which I agree with what you said with Google, because it's like the 10 blue links and like they have a very specific. This has been around for so long. There's SEO firms that have figured out how it changes and what you need to do and all of that. But it's going to be very different for AI search.
Yeah, I think I'm for startup project. We are starting to see ChatGPT as a source of traffic, Perplexity as a source of
Interesting,
traffic.
really.
And my theory here is um, Google had a different set of criteria for SEO. Like your heading, there have to be 5 headings. The title has to be this length. We have over time developed these silly SEO ideas of what it means to be, SEO friendly. And now I think we are moving to a place where it's subject matter heavy. And because when you ask a deep query on OpenAI's new model, it's not going to look for, if it has headings, or if the title is
Yep.
5 points. It is trying to see who has written about the subject, in a more deeper way. So you can't
Yeah.
get away with writing 5 listicles and getting traffic. You have to
Yeah.
be like, writing more and, writing more deeply about a particular topic rather than just on a surface level.
That's such a good point. I've noticed. So when we start with a new client and I'm trying to deep dive on the founder and get like interesting tidbits from a story that he hasn't told us, usually the founder's already been on a couple of podcasts at some point in their career. And I'll ask like very deep questions to Perplexity about their background, or some like pretend I'm, pitching a podcast host, like go deep into like what they could talk about. And it often pulls from past podcast interviews if it was like transcript or something, and I'll get the best nuggets that way, because not only is it pulling from that, but it's getting like the very best stuff from that. And it's been such a new hack that I've been using. And you're totally right about how it's picking the things from like deeper sources, and things that I probably would have had to spend like 10 hours looking for in the past. But I think that's a huge value add.
So just talking about your own, firm strategy, a lot of PR firms, I usually see that reach out to me, usually have a marketing wing to it. And a lot of PR firms usually have either a relationship with another marketing firm or just do marketing themselves, because it kind of makes sense, because a lot of stories. Like if you pitch a podcast, you get a blog post out of it. You can offer that services to your customers. How do you think about that PR plus marketing?
Oh, interesting. Like are they saying if you have a guest on, we will do a blog post about it?
No, I'm saying you as a PR firm offering marketing services to your founders.
Ah, got it, got it. It's interesting because I've gotten asked about this a lot with how much media is changing. We've been we've basically had a wait list for, the past 6 months. We like can't take on new clients. We've been so busy that it just hasn't been, I haven't felt like the pressure to explore that sort of thing yet. And I'm sure it'll happen eventually because media is going to continue to change. But it's like almost like don't mess with a good thing. And maybe this is just SixEastern specific and other firms have different approaches. But for us, we're busy with our current client base and we have a lot going on for them and we can't take on new work. So adding new services doesn't sound appealing to me at all.
We're almost at the end of our conversation, and I ask some generic questions to all my guests.
Okay.
What are you consuming right now that's influencing you? It can be, intellectual or just fun.
Yeah. Let's see. I just want to make sure I get the name right. So I've been loving, have you seen TBPN yet? It's a X. Well, okay, I don't know if it's not only on X, but it's basically like a daily live show. That's kind of like a podcast, but with video, but it kind of looks more similar to like CNBC, or even ESPN, where they have on multiple guests every episode for just a couple of minutes each. So each episode has like 5 or 6 guests on it, and quick little interviews. And it's been everything from like the Flexport CEO to like VCs. Box CEO is on it. But some really big names have been on it, and I've been really fascinated with
Oh, you mean I
tech,
think I know what you're talking about. I
Technology
think
Bros before, or
Technology
Brothers before,
Bros. Okay.
but
Yeah, I
now
know the
it's
bros thing.
TBPN.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, I've been loving it, and I love it because it's like kind of a novel format,
Yeah.
where I think it has like also this network effect to it, where because it's daily and because there's so many guests on and because it's live, like it just encourages you to watch, and it's just been so fun, and I've been excited to like both as like a audience member and as someone that like is pitching it for clients. We had our first client on yesterday. I'm excited to get more. But yeah, that's been one of my favorites lately.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I've seen clips of it. I didn't know it was live, but I've definitely seen it, clips of it. It sort of feels like what um, I don't know if you know Anthony Pompliano. He talks a lot
Oh,
about
yeah,
Bitcoin.
yes, I know him pretty well.
So he, I think, does a morning show every day, or he used to do a morning show, like a business show. I think it's sort of like, just like for Wall Street Journal, we have all these new Substacks, right? So we have now CNBC, and everyone is trying to create the new version of CNBC because CNBC has a 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern show with Squawk Box, right? It's almost like a new version of Squawk Box. Now that you're telling me that it's live, it feels like a new version of
Yeah,
Squawk Box, but it's for
100%,
startups
100%.
and everyone. And Squawk Box is, widely popular show on
Yeah,
CNBC.
yeah.
Um,
And I don't know if you remember Cheddar, but they were trying to be the like younger version of
yeah,
CNBC as well for a while. I don't know. I haven't really, they've kind of gone off the map in some ways. But for a while, that was kind of their goal too.
I mean, I could see Robinhood or StockTwits or one of these apps actually doing it or acquiring TPBN. You could probably do some format that makes a lot of sense for Robinhood. But
Yeah,
again, there's also rules about like you're trading products, so whether it actually makes sense to do it or not is a question. But I think Yahoo had that acquired Cheddar, or it used to come on Yahoo
oh, yes,
Finance.
yes, it was a
Um,
part.
yeah, so I think it was initially hyped up, was interesting, slightly different format, but somehow it didn't really stay the course.
Totally, totally. Something about it didn't quite land. But it's interesting because Ramp is, I think, the biggest sponsor of TBPN right now, which also makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I think I just wanted to ask a little bit more about Ramp because I see Ramp everywhere these days. So what's happening with the Ramp strategy here?
Yeah, so they're not a client right now. They were a client. We were their first comms partner back when they like launched and did comms in the very beginning. So I can't speak to it now, but they seem like they're doing great. Lots and lots going on over there. So I think they're just like a team that's really good at like moving quickly and executing.
So my next question is, who are your mentors who helped in your career?
Oh, I love that question. Interesting. So I think one that comes to mind when I was at Box, I think I actually learned a lot just from watching their CEO, Aaron Levy, and his approach to comms. I think he, first of all, really valued comms. Like for the company size, there was a pretty large comms team. And he was someone that was just like very scrappy, I would say, on his own. He was willing to comment on pretty much anything happening on the news, and willing to go on, broadcast to talk about Apple's news or any other company. Anytime we had a company partnership, he wanted to go all out with media. I remember back when they did their Microsoft partnership, he wanted to do a tweet back and forth with like Satya Nadella, and we came up with like this fun little joke and actually like worked. And then like I think CNET wrote an article about it, and just like I don't know, I think I learned a lot of my like scrappiness from just watching him as a spokesperson, and it totally. And then I also saw like the business value from it because he was able to then go tout like product announcements and things that actually helped the company from being so visible. So yeah, that's one that comes to mind. And then let's see. I don't know. I worked with like tons of great people at Uber, but I feel like I shouldn't like name one. I would say one that right now, my who's a dear friend of mine, she's actually one of my bridesmaids, but her name is Colette Keen, and she's a content consultant. And I feel like our brains are very different, and she's very analytical with things, and like I don't know, I think has some like really interesting perspectives on the space that I'm in and like where it's going, and has really like kind of inspired me in a lot of ways to I think about the business more holistically, which I'm often just very execution focused. Like, let me get through, help my team get really in the weeds on things. But I think she helps me like take a step back a lot of times.
What do you know about PR, you know, that you wish you know before starting your career?
Interesting. Man, it's like changed so much. Before starting my agency. It's a good question. I mean, it's been kind of, I don't know that I have anything. I think it hasn't really, there's nothing that I necessarily think I wish I knew. If anything, I would say most recently, and maybe I have something that comes to mind. I think a lot of publications overall have moved away from doing funding stories, period. Even TechCrunch and Axios, which are two that covered them a lot. And I think I would have maybe changed our model sooner to like not be as focused on those. And this is kind of a lesson that I'm like currently learning as we speak. But I think that the playbook is changing there, and I don't know what the new playbook is. But it's one that I think I should have given more thought to maybe earlier.
One more question related to your experience at Uber. Uber had a lot of interesting PR challenges, back when Travis was there. Are there any interesting crisis mode, things that you were involved at Uber that you can talk about?
Yeah, so it's funny. I joined I think the week that a lot of that stuff had kind of started within the business. So it was kind of crazy timing for me. But my role at Uber was really focused on comms for Uber for Business, which is their B2B product, and then also their business development team. So any company partnerships that they had. So it's like, so I wasn't on the corporate comms team where we were focused on like actual crisis, but it was like, if anything, it was a lesson for me to try to figure out how to pitch and land positive stories amidst a world where all this negative stuff was happening around the business. And I did. I mean, I got some really great hits during that time, and I think it was about being very creative with who we worked with and kind of doing the due diligence and seeing what they thought about Uber and whether they were going to focus on the wrong things, and then pitching stories in a very specific way. I also made some mistakes. I think, it was like you have to like take calculated risks sometimes, and they don't always pay off. But yeah, it was a unique challenge, and I really liked my time at Uber, but it was, a unique challenge trying to get them positive press during that time.
What type of positive press did you get? Because I only remember the negative stuff at that point.
Well, I got a couple good ones. So I launched Uber Health, which was HIPAA compliant patient transportation. And we basically went after health tech reporters, which could not care less about, the rideshare side of the business, and got tons of product features on that. We had some great like hospitals. I think it was like clinics or hospital systems that were using the product. So we put customers forward. We put a spokesperson forward that was like the GM of that part of the business. So it wasn't anyone that was involved in anything else going on. So yeah, we got some really straightforward hits that way. And I think some of these folks too are like, it's kind of a unique opportunity to get to chat with Uber about how they're thinking about healthcare. And so they want to write a story that's really focused on that and not on the 50 other stories that are being written about the crisis in the business. And same with Uber for Business, actually. Like we got, I think, a Wall Street Journal feature on their new head of the org, and who's also actually named Travis, which is funny. And it was really focused on him joining the business and what he was hoping to build within it. And so, yeah, I think the right reporter, they're kind of just excited to be able to get that sneak peek into what the company's doing.
Question, what is which niche or sector of startups are ignored by the PR for startups industry?
Yeah. I think with all the focus on AI, a lot of those reporters that used to cover like enterprise software more broadly are not anymore. There's like no enterprise software, like if you're not doing AI, there's like not the right reporters out there for you right now. And so those are the companies I kind of struggle with the most in getting the right folks interested, because it's just so all consuming in AI right now that if your company doesn't have that angle, that you're kind of left out to dry. So I would say that's probably enterprise software, non-AI is the answer.
Emily, thanks for joining the show. I think it was very insightful, and I think our audience will learn about PR for startups.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was a great combo.